Good morning. Thank you for joining me on this video. I want to talk to you this morning about zoning. When you take a listing, there's a lot of things you have to be concerned about. You want to be concerned about the style of the property. You want to be concerned about the room sizes and the number of bathrooms. You want to be concerned about the taxes. There's a whole bunch of things you want to check out. But a very important part of your due diligence is finding out about zoning. The City of St. Catharines and all your municipalities produce zoning maps. They do this from time to time, no specific time, although across the province of Ontario in 2013, there was a push made to revise all the official plans and all the zoning maps across the province. And at that time, the City of St. Catharines brought out a new official plan, extensive zoning changes, published a zoning map, and came out with their zoning bylaws, which also explained all the things that can and cannot be done under any given zone. So you take your listing, you go in the case of our office, we have a zoning map on the wall in the agent work area, and you go in and you check out the specific street, the specific location, and find out what the zoning is. Then if you like, you can go to the zoning bylaw book and you can find out what's allowed in that particular zoning. But on the listing, you designate what the zoning is. Very important to get it right because it limits what you can and cannot do legally. And that's why on the agreement of purchase and sale, one of the things the lawyer is required to do is make sure that its current use may lawfully be continued. A big part of that, of course, is zoning. But the zoning map in itself doesn't tell the whole story. There's other considerations that have to be taken into account. One of them, for example, is something called legal nonconforming. And the principle here is that if you have a particular use and then the zoning changes, and with the change in zoning, the use you're using is no longer permitted, they won't take away that use by changing the zoning. When the City of St. Catharines brought out their 2013 revised plan, an awful lot of R2 zones were changed to R1. That means what was allowing a duplex no longer allows a duplex. But if you had a duplex there and you can prove it was a legal duplex prior to the zoning change, it's legal non-conforming. Of course, the onus is on you to be able to prove that the use predated the zoning change, whenever it was. There's other considerations as well as zoning, and that comes under the bylaws. I may have a property that conforms to the zoning, for example, for a duplex, but it may not satisfy the parking regulations, the side yard or the setback, the fire regulations. All these things have to be taken into consideration before I can say it can legally be used as such and such a purpose. And then there's overriding legislation that comes in province-wide. And some years ago, the province introduced legislation that would permit what we call granny flats. The idea was they recognized there was a lot of people who were property rich, cash poor, and they needed additional revenue, and so they allowed them to make an apartment in their unit and rent it out, even though it wasn't zoned as a duplex. Of course, the municipalities could put in certain restrictions, the amount of square footage, the percentage of the whole house that can be used, and then, of course, they had to comply with fire and so on and so forth. But another real critical thing that you have to keep in mind is the fact that the zoning map, the most current zoning map, may well not be accurate. In the City of St. Catharines, the zoning map is revised between 10 and 20 times a year as spot zoning changes. So what might be an R1 zone could be changed to an R2 zone. What might be a commercial could be changed to multifamily. They make changes, and of course it isn't reflected until the next zoning map comes out. Spot zoning changes. It's very, very important that you get it right. When you're the listing agent, you have to get it right on the listing. But even if you're not the listing agent, and this is something you need to keep in mind, if your buyer, and you're representing a buyer, asks you a specific question, it's incumbent on you to make sure you get the information right for the inquiry he's making, over and above perhaps what the listing agent may have done on the listing. We had a situation like this some time ago where a property, it was a townhouse, when it wasn't our listing, was listed on the board, and behind the townhouse there was a vacant field. And so the buyer, who was buying through our office, after the agreement was in place, said to the agent, by the way, what's the story with that vacant field? What's going on there? So the agent checked the listing, and the listing said across from the property is green space. The agent went beyond that and went to the most current zoning map that we had, and the zoning map said green space. But the agent went beyond that, contacted the listing agent, said, what can you tell me about that field adjacent to the property? And the listing agent said, no, it is green space. And in fact, the agent representing the seller checked the last 8 or 9 listings in that area and all referenced green space across the street. They didn't stop there. They went to the seller, and the seller said, when I bought the property, the builder gave me this survey sketch, and you can see on the survey sketch, it says parkland across the way in the land you're talking about. I've never heard anything different. So the selling agent went back to the buyer and said, this is the inquiries I've made. This is what the zoning map said. This is what the listing said. This is what the listing agent said. This is what the seller said. Provided all that information. Turned out the information was incorrect. And in fact, the following year, with the new zoning bylaw, the new map came out, and the map showed that this was now no longer green space. It was now R2 designation for multifamily. What had happened was the city made a change, and I spoke to the city, and the city said, we really screwed up here. We're supposed to contact all the stakeholders when we're going through this process. We didn't do that. And so the seller was right in saying, as far as I know, it's green space. They'd never been told otherwise. But the fact of the matter is, the inquiry that the buyer made, he didn't get up-to-date information. And it's imperative that you get that up-to-date information. So the question is, what do we do? How do we prevent getting the information wrong? In addition to the zoning map, which is where you should start, you need to pick up the phone and call the city or whatever municipality the listing is in and ask them the question. Ask them what it currently is zoned as. And I'd suggest, especially if it's an inquiry, because the onus is much more on your shoulders when it's a buyer making inquiry, get the response in writing. Make sure that you understand that. And then, of course, there's a lot of other due diligence to do. Some of the things we talked about. Does it conform with the bylaw provisions? Does it conform? Is it legal non-conforming? And so on and so forth. A lot of things to do to make sure you get your homework right. Starts with a zoning map, doesn't end there. I hope that makes sense. I want to thank you very much for joining me in this video. I'll talk to you again very soon.